It would be very interesting, just as a thought experiment, to see what happens when you can enable and empower more people to be able to see through the propaganda. Welcome to Thought Experiments. Just having a little bit of fun thinking through the chaos that is foisted upon us by what appears to be some, we could say, nefarious people. Maybe. Thought experiment. A thought experiment is a hypothetical situation in which a hypothesis, theory, or principle is laid out for the purpose of thinking through its consequences. So we're being hit with a lot of psychological manipulations. You could even say psychological operations, propaganda. We're definitely going to talk more about propaganda on this channel. Propaganda is communication that is primarily used to influence or persuade an audience to further an agenda, which may not be objective and may be selectively presenting facts to encourage a particular synthesis or perception, or using loaded language to produce an emotional rather than rational response to the information that is being presented. Propaganda. So we really have to think about this in terms of the news, the corporate news media, the government, and international mega corporations work hand in hand to decide what information is delivered to you, to us. It's on us to have proper discernment and really be able to look at what's being fed to us, right? To really choose what we want to ingest. Think about it that way. Discernment, the ability to judge well. The noun discernment describes a wise way of judging between things or a particularly perceptive way of seeing things. So we really got to talk about perception. We got to talk about discernment, propaganda, the idea of psychological operations, perception, the ability to see, hear, or become aware of something through the senses. The state of being or process of becoming aware of something through the senses. Psychological operations are operations to convey selected information and indicators to audience to influence their motives and objective reasoning, and ultimately the behavior of governments, organizations, groups, and large foreign powers. The thing about the phrase psychological operations, you understand that if you compare that definition with the definition I gave earlier for propaganda, the parallels are striking. So they're almost one and the same. I would argue that the concept of propaganda is something that ultimately is neutral, but by and large is used for nefarious purposes. Emotional manipulation, disarming your logic, your analytical faculties. And we have to really look at this from a position of objectivity and keep an energy of stoicism, where almost in a comical way, analyzing what's happening and just being able to see the irony of it. At the very least, if we can't prove what's being delivered to us, we should at least be willing to apply a certain level of skepticism to it. Most of the information is coming from what could be considered as known corrupt organizations. If we really understand the gravity of that statement and the truth of that, objectively provable, known corrupt organizations, our position should be of high skepticism. We should automatically apply a concept of make them prove it. They have to prove this, not simply buy into what they put on a screen, what they present to us, regardless of how powerful the images are or how well designed these images are to tug at heartstrings or to create feelings of fear, anxiety. These tactics are specifically used on purpose to bypass your logic and analytical faculties and to get you into more of a animal emotional state, which makes you easier to manipulate. Because it should be understood, we are dealing with known corrupt organizations who definitely have certain agendas, whether it be purely based on money or more so on higher level social engineering control agendas. We have to take these things seriously because there's historical proof, historical documentation, historical reference points that show all of these things to have been in play and to be in play as we speak. One of the biggest things in history, of course, has taken place within the last 3.5 years. On the back of that experience alone, it's important that we apply a certain level of objectivity and willingness to look beyond simply what's being fed to us and look at the motives, the ideas, the concepts, who benefits. As we look at the common themes delivered to us at high frequency by way of the mainstream corporate news media, we have to see the common thread where most of these things are rooted in conflict, fear, incidents that cause anxiety. It's usually, let's just keep it real, it's death, destruction, and fear, and chaos, and debauchery. So much conflict. Just imagine what would happen if more people arrived at levels of discernment where these things simply didn't have the power they do now. If everybody could stand back and say, I'm not gonna be so emotionally attached to what's being fed to me on this screen, it would be very interesting, just as a thought experiment, to see what happens when you can enable and empower more people to be able to see through the propaganda. Welcome to Thought Experiments. That's the whole point of this channel. I really want to leverage the idea of objectivity, strong use of analytical faculties, as opposed to being emotionally. People getting all up in their feelings is just entirely too dangerous. We really have to arm ourselves with the tools. I would even say not arm ourselves with the tools. We have to enable the onboard tools, weapons, defenses that we actually already have. I want to be lighthearted about it, but the seriousness of this is actually pretty dire. Literally, our sense of self-preservation, at the very least self-respect, depends on our ability to have this level of discernment and be able to see the bullshit that's being fed to us. It's totally unacceptable, but it's ultimately on us to empower ourselves to be able to sort of decipher and decode this stuff. Once you can really wrap your mind around the idea that most of what we're being fed comes from known corrupt organizations, then it becomes very easy to think through and extrapolate that most of what we're seeing, most of what's being delivered to us, is not in our best interest.